ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਾਊਨਟਾਊਨ 300 ਵੈਸਟ ਜਾਰਜੀਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਆਫਿਸਿਸ ਹੈ ਐਂਡ ਰੀਜਨਲ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰਸ ਆਫਿਸ ਇਨ ਡਾਊਨਟਾਊਨ ਸੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਅੱਜ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਅਨੀਤਾ ਆਨੰਦ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਰਾਈਟ ਨਾਓ ਟ੍ਰੇਜ਼ਰੀ ਬੋਰਡ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਸੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਕਾਫੀ ਵਿਸ਼ੇ ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਪੀਪਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਰਾਊਂਡ ਟੇਬਲ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਦੇਖਣ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲੂਗਾ ਕਿ ਕੌਣ ਕੌਣ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਕਵਰ ਕਰਨ ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਂਝਾ ਟੀਵੀ FYY ਮੀਡੀਆ ਦੀ ਤਰਫੋਂ ਇਸ ਇਵੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਅਟੈਂਡ ਕਰਨ ਡਾਊਨਟਾਊਨ ਆਏ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਥੋੜੀ ਦੇਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆਨੰਦ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਉਣਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਨੂੰ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਕਾਫੀ ਕੁਐਸਚਨਿੰਗ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵੀ ਥੋੜੇ ਦਿਮਾਗ 'ਚ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਤੋਂ ਸੁਣੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਅਫੋਰਡੇਬਿਲਟੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਵੇ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਹਾਊਸਿੰਗ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਵੇ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਾਂ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਰਾਈਟ ਨਾਓ ਸਫਰ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਬਿਕੋਜ਼ ਆਫ ਦ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਅੱਜ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਡਿਸਕਸ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਥੋੜੀ ਦੇਰ 'ਚ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆਨੰਦ ਨਾਲ CJ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਿੰਗ from downtown Vancouver.
Thank you everyone for coming. Minister will start off with doing really short remarks and then we'll do a round table. We'll do 2 questions that we'll start with and then, you know, as time permits, we'll do another round of questions and we'll see how we keep going. We have until 4:15, so yeah, let's use our time wisely.
Amazing. Well, hi everybody. It's really great to see you here. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm super excited to be back in Vancouver. I come frequently, but yesterday I was in Whistler, meeting with local businesses, seeing an affordable housing complex with federal investments, and then delivering the keynote speech at the Penwar conference. And it was a very important moment for us to recognize that Canada-US relations, as well as the symmetry and cooperation across border, will continue to be a priority for us as a federal government. And then today I participated in an announcement relating to federal investments for rare drugs, for rare diseases, as well as for personal support workers. Or healthcare assistance that they're referred to here in British Columbia. And the federal government is putting down $232 million over 5 years to help PSWs and to support their work, recognizing the work that they did during the pandemic here in British Columbia and across our country. And of course, I'd be happy to talk to you about other federal supports that we have in place, not just for PSWs, but for various vulnerable communities in our population. And then this afternoon I visited a school. J'ai parlé français avec les étudiants là. It was a French school in Coquitlam, and it was wonderful to be there with the students. So without that, I would just love to turn the floor over to you for any questions that you might have.
Maybe we can start over here. Yeah.
So CJ Sidhu,
CJ.
Sanjha TV,
yeah.
TV host. So I will start with the convention you recently attended, the PENWAR, they call it Pacific Northwest Economic Region
Yes.
Conference. Just tell us in a summarized way what they do and why it's important.
Well, that's a great question actually, because we want people in British Columbia to be able to understand the importance of the Penwar Conference, but also the Canada-US relationship. So we had legislators and industry experts from both sides of the border gathering in Whistler to discuss the bilateral relationship between Canada and the United States. And from a federal standpoint, what I was talking about is making sure that we hear from businesses as to how we can reduce red tape to make it more efficient for them to do business on both sides of the border. And that means we're going to have more regulatory symmetry or more consistency in our regulation. I also talked about the productivity issue in Canada and reducing interprovincial barriers to trade. So that was the gist of my comments at the Penwar conference, and of course they asked me to come back next year, so we should do this again then.
So just to follow up, Canada-US relationship is always very important. And having said that, first of all, your comment on Kamala Harris being, actually is pretty much shoot in to be a nominee. It just will be announced in a convention in August. So what are your take on that? And then leading to this, what you said about a red tape and stuff, in British Columbia, especially the lumber industry is hurting big time. And probably that topic came up with talking to business people.
Yes. So on the subject of the U.S. election, I will say that every election, as an example of the way in which democracy works, is something that we should celebrate. It is important for elections to happen so that democracy can function effectively. As for Kamala Harris herself, I'm deeply inspired by her leadership and I wish her all the very best. She's a role model for so many people, including myself. In terms of the barriers to trade or irritants in the trade relationship, the Regulatory Cooperation Council that I am leading from the Government of Canada was set up in 2011 to deal with issues exactly like the one you mentioned, CJ, the lumber issues, labeling on various food products or efficiencies needed in order to cross the border through the trucking industry, for example. Those are all the types of issues that we are examining from a cross-border perspective. I've met with my U.S. counterpart, Shalent Young, once. She's with the Office of Management and Budget in the United States, and I'll be going back in early September to finalize the work plan between Canada and the United States with the Regulatory Cooperation Council in mind. Well, actually, we are doing some work on this issue right now. I have met with businesses starting here in Vancouver, Winnipeg, Moncton, Windsor, Ottawa, to hear from businesses, what is it that you need the federal government to step up to do to reduce interprovincial barriers to trade, which is with what is within our jurisdiction. So we can move on things like Health Canada approvals. We can move on things like efficiencies at the border. In terms of licensing of professionals, we do need the provinces to address those issues because those licenses are provincial. I'm a lawyer by training. I get qualified by the Law Society of Ontario. In order for my law license to apply in all jurisdictions, I would need each provincial and territorial government to set in place some sort of mutual recognition. That is, because you're qualified in Ontario, you should also be qualified in elsewhere. And that is a very important concept. Mutual recognition. I've been talking about that with my American counterparts, and I think it's pertinent in terms of Canada as well. We should be able to have more mutual recognition of qualifications because the requirements to practice law, for example, in each jurisdiction are substantively similar, and therefore it makes sense for provinces to recognize the qualifications in other jurisdictions. And so that's something that I'm advocating. Dominic LeBlanc, Minister LeBlanc, and I are going to be doing more work on this very issue, reducing interprovincial barriers to trade. So I hope to have a future conversation with you later this year once we have more to say. Well, thank you for asking that question. It was $500 million at the end of 2023. Now, since the beginning of this year, I have managed to reduce spending on from various departments and reallocate that spending to our government's priorities in the amount of approximately $15.8 billion over 5 years and $4.8 billion every year thereafter. And I have tabled those results in the main estimates. And so my team will provide you with the specific numbers, but I will say that this is the first ever government spending review in our government, and we are on track to make those savings that I just mentioned. Why is that important? Because while we are providing supports for vulnerable communities, the Canada Child Benefit, $10 a day childcare, increases to old age security, and the guaranteed income supplement, we are also making sure that we are prudent with taxpayer dollars. That is, making sure we reduce our spending on executive travel and third-party contracting and reallocating that money to our government's priorities. So we are now in the second phase of the spending review, and that was outlined in budget 2024. You're going to see the size of the public service be reduced through natural attrition, and there will be additional measures that we put in place. Let's start with the role of Treasury Board. The role of Treasury Board is to oversee $450 billion of federal expenditures every year, and we implement the policies that are in the budget and that are passed by Cabinet. In order to do that, we need to make sure that we are accountable to taxpayers, that we're undertaking a risk analysis with federal finances, and that we address areas of inefficiency. So the size of the public service and the examination of reductions there have to be fairly nuanced, because we do need experts in the cyber area, for example, in the area of AI, where we are competing with the Googles of the world for the experts in this field. We also need to make sure that we're efficient as a public service. And so I will be examining the issue of productivity in the public service more deeply to ensure that we're utilizing AI and the digital economy in the best way possible. And then finally, I will say that to make the public service even more efficient, we are moving to a more digital system. So we're moving away from legacy technology, legacy systems for payment and for dispersing benefits, to digitized systems, and that is also within the purview of the Treasury Board. We are a large owner of property in Canada, and what we did this year is take the unprecedented step of saying we are going to start utilizing certain federal properties for affordable housing. It is not with a viewpoint that these are revenue generating properties necessarily, although revenue may be forthcoming. It is really to ensure an affordable housing stream of accommodation for individuals who can't afford housing given the high prices of cost of living and housing generally. So that's on the affordable housing side of things. You mentioned deficit spending. The issue there is ensuring that we have our fiscal house in order. And there is evidence, indeed external objective evidence, that the finance minister's planning is working. For example, we have a AAA credit rating. That's from Standard & Poor's, an independent objective rating agency. We have the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7, and we have historically low unemployment. So we are seeing inflation and interest rates coming down. We still need to ensure that we are working within the fiscal parameters that we must, but the record that we have been setting is prudent overall.
So, Minister, while we're on this topic, my next question leading to the gentleman's question is, so you said that as looking at the profile of Treasury Board and what do you do, all the ministries' budget come on your table, and I think, and my question is, do you have tools either to approve or not to approve, or is it rubber stamped and go through that process? That's my first question. And alluding to gentleman's question is there any efforts made by, you said that, inefficiencies, productivity, all that, and one day coming to a point where we can have a balanced budget?
Thank you, CJ, for the questions, and I'll start off by saying that Treasury Board is not a rubber stamp. To think of it that way would mean that our work every week around the Treasury Board table is perfunctory. And I will say that what we do there is we undertake a risk analysis. And we say, is this value for money? what is the Canadian taxpayer getting? How can we do our best work for Canadian taxpayers? And that is what we seek to deliver at Treasury Board. It is the message of prudence, and it is work to approve every government program on that basis. In terms of the budget, the Finance Minister and our government have made a decision to ensure that fiscal guardrails are in place. And the fiscal guardrail that we are utilizing right now is the net debt to GDP ratio. And the fact that we have the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7 is very significant. And I will also say, you know, thinking about your first question about trade, that Canada is only the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. That says something about our values. That says something about the importance of multilateralism to our country, not only in the area of regulatory cooperation, but in the area of trade, in the area of shared economic growth. And you will see our government, regardless of who is in the White House in November 2024, you will see our government continuing to espouse the principle of multilateralism.
Thank you. And another question, you said in your editorial about announcement with the Minister of Health, Mark Holland.
Yes, yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about that announcement, please?
Most definitely. This morning, Minister Holland announced up to $1.5 billion over the next 3 years to access affordable and effective drugs for rare diseases. And the government is going to ensure that up to $1.4 billion will be provided to provinces and territories through the bilateral agreements. And the agreement reached with British Columbia this morning is the first of those bilateral agreements. So that's on the effective drugs side of thing. There was a part 2 to that announcement, and that is support for healthcare assistants known across Canada as personal support workers. And the government is making sure that it provides $232 million over 5 years to help personal support workers or healthcare assistants within British Columbia. And it was very telling at the press conference this morning to hear Minister Dix as well as Minister Holland provide their gratitude and their appreciation to personal support workers for their work during the pandemic. This was a harrowing time for everyone across the country. Personal support workers, healthcare assistants, went into long-term care homes. They put their own lives on the line to save the lives of the elderly population and patients at large. And this is a small step of repaying their hard work. It's a very good question. I will start off by highlighting that the Prime Minister announced earlier this month that we will reach the 2% mark by 2032. But even before that, our defense spending is increasing. Under our current defense policy, Strong, Secure, Engaged, our defense spending is increasing by 70% between 2017 and 2026. In the defense policy update that was released as part of Budget 2024, our defense spending is going to reach 1.76% within the next 5 years. And so you can see under this government that our defense spending is increasing. Let me give you some tangible examples. When I was Minister of National Defense, I announced the purchase of 88 F-35s from Lockheed Martin. That is very important equipment for the Canadian Air Force that is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. We are purchasing surface combatants, which are large ships for the Navy. We are also purchasing air-to-air refueling planes, strategic tankers they're referred to as, and we've also invested in equipment for the Canadian Armed Forces. So I want to take a step back and say Our government is actually making significant investments in the Canadian Armed Forces, unlike the Conservatives, where defense spending dipped below 1% under Prime Minister Harper. So that's very, very important. And once again, we will reach the 2% by 2032, if not before. So as part of the defense policy update, what we put on the table were a number of procurements and other investments that, such as submarines, that we could undertake in order to better equip the Canadian Armed Forces, and those could be included as well in our defense spending. So I know the Department of National Defense is examining the particular procurements and other supports that will be put on the table. But this thinking about our spending on national defense is not just occurring this month or even this year. Over the past number of years, our government has been committed to increased defense spending. You can see that in the procurements, but you can also see the roadmap for that in the Defense Policy Update, which is available online, which will ensure that our Canadian Armed Forces have the best equipment possible. And I want to say one more thing. To bring it back to multilateralism, the issue that I spoke about in Whistler yesterday. Multilateralism doesn't just mean our trade relationships. It also means our defense relationships. NATO is a multilateral alliance. Canada was a founding member of NATO. We have the 6th largest defense budget of any NATO country, of all NATO countries. Canada's number 6 in real terms. So our defense spending by that metric alone is clearly high. What we need to do is to continue to increase that defense spending, and I know Minister Blair and the Prime Minister are working extremely hard on that. Well, you're going to see that in the Defense Policy Update. You're going to see that. What you're also going to see, and that's available now for everyone to read, what you're also going to see when you take a look at it is the importance of the Arctic. We need to make sure that that interface with other Arctic countries is safeguarded and protected. And so the Defense Policy Update focuses on protecting the security of the North as well as the security of our natural resources, which many of which are contained in the ground in the North. And so our continental security very much depends on our northern security. When I was Minister of National Defense, I had long conversations with Secretary Austin about the importance of the North. And in terms of NORAD's priorities, we will continue to work together from a continental perspective to protect the entire continent, especially the North. And I'll just say this. You'll all remember when cylindrical objects were flying over our country in the United States last year. At that moment, we saw NORAD, for the first time, activating its bilateral commitment by shooting down a cylindrical object over the Yukon. That shows you the power of our bilateral relationship. And that shows you that Canada and the United States are very strong partners from an economic standpoint and from a defense standpoint. So the decisions that Ukraine as a sovereign country make are Ukraine's alone to make. What NATO is doing is supporting Ukraine's decisions to maintain its sovereignty, security, and self-determination. And so the plans that NATO allies have revolve around supplying aid, lethal and non-lethal aid, so that Ukraine can continue to defend its geographical borders. I want to say also that Ukraine isn't only fighting for its freedom, it's fighting for all of our freedoms, in the sense that the international rules-based order that has been in place since the end of the Second World War is clearly under threat. And so NATO countries very much feel the moral obligation to continue to support Ukraine in its hour of need, given the unjustifiable illegal invasion that Russia made on February 24th, 2022.
So, Minister, the average person, like the middle class, and that's your party's mantra and, your cabinets taking care of middle class. And the middle class is suffering with the affordability, housing, and how you are going to fix this problem. It's not an easy problem to fix, but I know the inflation is coming down and interest rates are a little bit coming down, maybe another cut in a day or so. So, but they they don't see in the grocery store or in Vancouver or Toronto, the average person can't afford a house, detached home.
So housing is an issue that is the responsibility of each level of government, the federal government, the provincial government, and municipal governments. And we all have to work together to ensure that we get through the challenges of more housing as soon as possible. What we did in the pandemic, and we've been doing ever since, is ensuring that we are there for Canadians in need, including in the area of housing. That's why we removed the GST on purpose-built rentals. That's why we have in place a mortgage charter. That's why we have put over $10 billion in housing in British Columbia to help over 140,000 families get the housing they need. And this includes over $500 million to create over 1,700 homes for the most vulnerable through the Rapid Housing Initiative. And then on top of that, this spring, we announced $2 billion in federal financing to enhance the BC Builds program and help up to 8,000 in between 8,000 and 10,000 new middle-class apartments to be built for British Columbians. So that's a snapshot of what we're doing right here in British Columbia. The answer to your question is that we need to continue to cooperate and collaborate and work together to get through the housing crisis. And Minister Fraser has put on the table a national housing strategy to build 4 million new homes by 2031. We've got to keep going down this road. But again, it's good to see provinces and municipalities step up. Minister Fraser has signed over 100 agreements with municipalities across Canada for federal funding going straight to municipalities, and we're going to keep making sure we step up on housing. So I'm sure you're aware that British Columbia has its own separate but equivalent carbon pricing system. And so that is first and foremost a measure in place by the democratically elected provincial government. And we actually looked at British Columbia's system and said that is an effective way to address environmental sustainability and carbon emissions. And so British Columbia is a leader in so many areas, not only in the healthcare area that we saw with this morning's announcement with the federal government, but also in the area of environmental sustainability. And across the country, for those jurisdictions that are paying into the federal scheme, the Canada Carbon Rebate puts more money in every pocket through a quarterly payment that is made. And 8 out of 10 families are better off with the carbon pricing approach that we've adopted. This is a commitment we're making to environmental sustainability, that we want to ensure that we are addressing carbon emissions, which are posing an existential threat to our planet that our children and grandchildren will inherit. But we, at the same time, need to address issues of affordability. So when you think about 8 out of 10 families being better off as a result of the carbon rebate, they will have that money to buy groceries and to address affordability challenges that they're facing. Now, I received my carbon rebate check recently, as did the other adult members of my family, and it says specifically on that check, Canada Carbon Rebate. That shows you that you are receiving money back from the payments that you're making, for example, at the pump. And over 100 economists have said that carbon pricing is the most effective way to address climate change. I know Minister Wilkinson, a minister from right here in British Columbia, has advocated and feels very strongly about this, as do my caucus colleagues, whom I've been seeing on this trip: Patrick Weiler, Talib Noor Mohammed, Hedy Fry, Wilson Mao. I've talked to them all on this trip, and I know that they're all very supportive of this as well. Canada Carbon Rebate, exactly. We don't, that is a term that has been coined by the opposition. That is not our term. Our term is the carbon rebate. And 8 out of 10 families in our country are better off as a result of the Canada Carbon Rebate. So the Prime Minister of our country has worked effectively with now 3 U.S. presidents. Okay? And what that shows is that regardless of who is in the White House, Canada will always work hard to reinforce our economic and military and technological relationship with the United States, regardless of who is in the White House. And the importance of that very point, that the Prime Minister has shown a significant ability to work with all 3 presidents who've been in place under his tenure, should show Canadians how important it is to have a steady hand at the wheel going forward, not only on environmental matters, but on all matters of a bilateral nature. The IRA, which you referenced in your question, the Inflation Reduction Act, initially had significant implications for Canada. We have a Team Canada approach and an excellent ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, who worked very hard on behalf of our country, together with our government, to ensure that Canada was able to continue to maintain a close relationship with the United States despite the IRA. And you have seen us develop an approach to environmental sustainability that isn't just the Canada Carbon Rebate, but also sees an investment in electric vehicle manufacturing and battery plants, for example, which also sees us ensuring that we reduce reliance on single-use plastics, while at the same time recognizing the importance of an economy based on natural resources. Minister Champagne has been working very hard to ensure that current grocers in Canada sign a grocery code of conduct as a means to ensure that the prices of groceries are very much at the forefront of the minds of grocers as they are carrying out their businesses. In addition, Minister Champagne has usefully said that competition is necessary in our country in order to ensure competitive prices exist. And he's working very hard on this file on a number of matters. I believe he has spoken with foreign organizations and enterprises about the possibilities that you raised in your question, but he would be better placed to opine on the state of those discussions.
Minister, welcome to Vancouver, and it was a nice conversation with you, but a couple of questions I forgot, well, not have enough time. So one is immigration. So immigration is Canada's fabric anyways, but having said that, we don't have infrastructure to support that. And having said that, I talked last week, 10 days ago, with Mark Miller, Minister Miller, and same question. So there is a flood of students, international students. And now with the point system that we put a little bit of break because that's what Canadians wanted. How we balance that the current students in an open work permit, that they will not suffer because some of them are losing their status within 3 to 6 months.
Sat Sri Akal, thank you for having me on your show, and it's great to see you here, CJ, again.
Thank you.
I just wanted to first and foremost mention the importance that immigration plays in the economic development of our country. We have always been a government that believes that immigration is an important driver of economic growth. At the same time, we need educational institutions, universities, and colleges to bear some responsibility for supporting international students in the area of housing, in the area of supports and infrastructure. And so Minister Miller's move to cap the permits for international students is really a temporary measure in order to ensure that colleges and universities are doing their part. I will say I'm a child of immigrants myself. My parents met in Ireland, they got married in England, they lived in India and Nigeria before immigrating to Nova Scotia in the 1960s. I know from their hard work and the hard work of so many immigrants in our country that that work is valuable and it needs to be valued. And we as a government will always ensure that we recognize the contributions that all populations make to the growth of the Canadian economy, while at the same time ensuring that the supports are in place for the immigrants who come to Canada.
So my next question is a political questions, and your minister and also politicians, and I talk to Randeep Sarai and Sukh Dhaliwal on a regular basis, like so much work done by your government for every walks of life. How come the government is trailing in the polls like by double-digit points? And I asked Randeep and Sukh, same question I will ask you. I said, are we having a communication problem delivering the message to Canadians?
The work that we are doing as a government will continue to be there for the most vulnerable in our country, as well as for broader infrastructure needs that our country has, like in the area of housing and the environmental sustainability issue that you and I talked about. In terms of the statistics that you mentioned, we need to keep going as a government. Canadians are depending upon us. Because of the Canada Child Benefit and $10 a day childcare, for example, the participation rate of women in the workforce is 85%. Those types of statistics also have to be recognized. And I want to say that whether it is the Canada Child Benefit or $10 a day childcare or the National School Food Program or dental care or pharmacare, every single time the Conservatives vote against those measures. So I think Canadians really have to recognize that there is a values difference. We are a government that supports this population. On the other side of the House, we have a party that says one thing and does another. If they really want to support Canadians, why aren't they voting in favor of the measures that we are putting on the table? You will always see our government step up to the plate to help Canadians. That's why I ran for office, and that's why I'm so honored to be able to serve in the various roles that the Prime Minister has entrusted to me.
Your message to my viewers in Punjabi or Hindi or English, obviously, we're talking.
Okay. Ki hal hai? Mera naam Anita hai. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And I will say shukriya, thank you so much for the work that our community is doing in Surrey and beyond to help vulnerable populations. I know that you are a very giving community. I have visited you a number of times, and I can't wait to get back to Surrey to see you in person again. Dhanyavad. Shukriya.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Take
I
care.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰਸ ਰੀਜਨਲ ਆਫਿਸ ਇਨ ਵੈਨਕੂਵਰ ਡਾਊਨਟਾਊਨ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆਨੰਦ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਡੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਈ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਖੁੱਲੀ ਕਨਵਰਸੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਈ। ਮੀਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਲੋਕ ਸੀ, ਆਪਣੇ ਦੂਸਰੇ ਚੈਨਲਸ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ, ਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ just from the affordability to housing to immigration, ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਡਿਫੈਂਸ ਦੀ ਸਪੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਹੈ 2%, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ, ਉਸ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਰੋਲ ਹੈ ਬੈਲੈਂਸਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਬਜਟ ਐਂਡ ਡਿਲੀਵਰਿੰਗ ਆਲ ਦਾ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਟੂ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ। ਸੋ ਕਾਫੀ ਓਪਨ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਇਆ, ਬੜੇ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਹੈਲਪ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। 10 ਡੇ ਕੇਅਰ ਲਾ ਲਓ, ਜਾਂ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਨਫਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਥੱਲੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਇੰਪਲੋਇਮੈਂਟ ਇਜ਼ ਇਨਕਰੀਜ਼ਿੰਗ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਵਜੂਦ ਮੈਂ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੋਲ 'ਚ ਕਿਉਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਲੈਕ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਮਿਊਨੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟੀਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, ਸਾਰੇ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਰਾਊਂਡਸ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸ ਸਮਰ ਦੇ ਟਾਈਮ 'ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਸੋਚਣ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨੇ ਅੱਜ ਤੱਕ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਲਈ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ। CJ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਿੰਗ ਫਰੋਮ ਡਾਊਨਟਾਊਨ ਵੈਨਕੂਵਰ।